let me get my program out. Jennifer Rogers, come on up here, Jennifer, please, from Tall Timbers Research, and the title of her talk, well, it says monitoring remotely, but the talk that I see here has a more informative title. However you want to do it.
Sure, yeah, I'll go
so,
for it.
thanks very much. Sure.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's glad to see so many people interested in this topic. So I'm going to discuss how we at Tall Timbers are using next generation satellite technology to map plant communities here in the southeastern coastal plain. And for those of you who may not know, plant communities are just plant assemblages or groups of plants that are found together naturally. And I don't assume many of you are intimately familiar with the world of satellite technology, so I am going to break it down to the basics and then bring you up to speed on the research that I did at Tall Timbers. Okay. First, a little introduction into what got me into satellite technology. And it was actually back in undergrad where I learned about this satellite called GRACE. And what GRACE does is it measures the Earth's gravity. And because the Earth is denser in some areas, it exerts more gravity. And you can almost think of it like the Earth being lumpy. And so what scientists did is they engineered these two satellites that are actually orbiting the Earth together 138 miles apart. And one is sending a microwave laser towards the other, and the other is measuring that laser. And so when one of the satellites moves over a part of the Earth that is more dense, it exerts more gravity, and just slightly, it dips down. And the other satellite is seeing this and measures that as a greater density in that location. And this is how we know that the ice sheets of the Arctic are thinning and how much water is even in our aquifers. And so I thought this was incredibly exciting. I don't actually work with this satellite, and I don't know a ton about it actually professionally, but it was my gateway into this sort of technology. And so what I am going to talk about is this paper that I published at Tall Timbers with Kevin Robertson and two other collaborators. So briefly into the sort of satellites we do use, thankfully I think they're actually a lot simpler because what they do is they take photos. And so they take photos that see the Earth at a distance, see the whole world globally, and have frequent revisits to the same location. And so that gives us the opportunity to see things like this image of Cambodia, where you can see the deforestation over the years that we otherwise wouldn't be able to see without this technology. So satellite imagery works like a camera photograph. And you can think of it sort of when maybe you were a small child and you put your face up against the TV screen and your parents are yelling at you because you're going to ruin your vision. When you are peering into that magical box, what you would see is something similar to this image where you are looking at three distinct small lines or color bands that are shining at different intensities. And what's happening is the TV is telling each pixel the numerical value of each of those three colors' intensity, and it is creating that exact color that it needs to be. And those three colors, the red, green, and blue, is nestled in the visible light spectrum between ultraviolet light and the infrared. There's also, moving away from just the red, green, blue, there are cameras that pick up additional colors, and we call these multispectral cameras. The first Earth-observing satellite that took multispectral imaging was Landsat 1. It was launched in 1972 and took pictures in 4 different colors: red, green, a shorter near-infrared, and a longer near-infrared. And so you might wonder why we would have an interest in taking photographs with colors that we can't even see. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about near-infrared, which is actually different than what many of you might think, which is thermal infrared. But this actually tells you something different. So in the 1940s, Kodak was actually requested by the military to create this new sort of film that captures infrared, and so plants that reflect infrared would appear pink, whereas green paints and dyes would actually look like a drab brown, and this was used for detecting camouflage during World War II. And this is a photo from Richard Moss. He has a great collection of these photographs that are haunting but beautiful and were captured during the Civil War in the Congo. So I recommend looking through those. But because of this process of plants reflecting infrared because of their internal structure and the way that they thermoregulate, we've been able to use this technology to see plant health. And farmers actually use this to detect nutrient deficiency, water stress, and disease, because the infrared will be decreased. And so you can use these sorts of satellites to create maps. This is from the most recent generation of Landsat satellites that actually collect pictures with 11 different bands. And this is a map created by Tall Timbers in conjunction with the USGS, and it is our southeast fire map that maps fires in the southeast. And you can see this is a picture of the Red Hills region nestled between Tall Timbers here in Monticello and Thomasville to the north, and shows the year since last fire going back to 1994. And you can see we do have a lot of frequent recent fire here. So the kinds of maps that I'm going to talk about are land use land cover maps. For those of you unfamiliar, these just categorize the Earth's surface in different categories. These can be natural or man-made. And it's important to know that we don't actually know where everything on Earth is. I feel like some people feel that we should know where everything is. And for example, we don't know where untouched, pristine ecosystems still exist in the wild in a lot of places. And for example, 80% of the Southeast is private property, and you can't simply just wander onto someone's property looking for these hidden gems. So, and while there are maps that currently exist that do map the Earth's surface, such as the National Land Cover Database, NLCD, it only covers 16 different classes, distinguishing, deciduous from evergreen. And if you dabble in ecology, you'll understand that that's just not sufficient for our interests. There is also land fire by the U.S. Forest Service. This includes more categories, but it isn't always the most accurate. Maybe you can glean that from the above picture, where we saw it should be all longleaf pine woodland, but it is showing as a pine plantation. And so we sought to create maps, but for our local communities, and use the most novel technology that we could implement. So while multispectral is powerful in a lot of ways, we did want to see how much we could push the new satellite technology that is available. So this includes hyperspectral imagery, which instead of collecting 3 or 11 bands, collects hundreds of different colors. And it takes advantage of the colors that we can't see, but it also is gathering these colors in small little slivers. And you can think of it where multispectral is collecting all different reds and putting it in a bucket labeled red, whereas hyperspectral is looking at things like burgundy and maroon and crimson and giving you an intensity value for each of those. And so hyperspectral, because color is determined by chemistry and structure, this causes light to reflect and absorb light differently, and then different objects or substances have a unique spectral signature, or the curve that you can see, it's sort of like a fingerprint of that substance. And so this level of detail is subtle enough that we can distinguish plants and soils by their chemistry and physical structure. So bringing it back down to earth now, we here are located in the North American coastal plain. This is a biodiversity hotspot with nearly 2,000 plants that exist nowhere else, many of them fire dependent, and the dominant ecosystem is the longleaf pine savanna, which has unfortunately been reduced to only 4% of its existing habitat, historic habitat range. And so we were interested in specific plant communities within the larger longleaf pine savanna grouping. So we adapted from the Florida Natural Areas Inventory Guide different categories, including flatwoods pine savannas, which are known to exist in dark, organic, acidic soils, and while they still have longleaf pine in the overstory, they have an understory that is a distinct dense grouping of saw palmetto as well as wiregrass. And they host a lot of rich biodiversity and endemism, meaning that there are plants that only exist within that plant community type. Moving on, we also have the sandhills pine savanna, which also has longleaf pine in the overstory, but has sandy soils, and instead of saw palmetto, has turkey oak, as well as that wiregrass component. There is also the upland pine savanna, prominent in the Red Hills region, and this is in clay soils instead of sand, and instead of turkey oak, we have the southern red oak. But there are a host of other specialized species that exist in the upland pine savanna, including sassafras and many legume species, and it is known to be one of the most biodiverse in North America, with as many as 52 distinct species in a 3-foot by 3-foot area. This differs greatly from a more human-affected land cover, which would be the pine plantations. So while some of them may have longleaf pine, because they aren't managed for biodiversity and they may have very dense overstories, there's not a lot that can take root in the understories. And so because of this, the biodiversity suffers. We also mapped old field pine savannas, and these are pine savannas that exist where upland pine savannas formerly did, but there were decades of row crop agriculture disturbing the soil. And so many of them have begun restoration and are on the path to becoming similar to what used to be there, the upland pine community. Because of the soil disturbance, many of the grasses can no longer compete, and there is a large woody understory component. And specifically, the wiregrass has a difficulty returning because it also only grows what we've seen as 4 inches per year. So getting that to establish is quite difficult. So the main objectives of this project were to map these different plant communities, as well as 16 others, making for 21 different land cover types. And we wanted to see how accurate of a map we could create, how accurate those different plant communities themselves could be mapped, and use this sort of as a proxy for biodiversity as well. The other major goal for this project was actually to test a hyperspectral pre-processing technique. And so because we have a lot of data, it may not be in the best form to be used. And so there was a method that was developed in order to try to tease apart these differences. And I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about this. I'm going to try not to go into so much that I lose everyone, but because the whole paper that I published did hinge on this concept, I'm going to have to talk about it a little bit, but if you feel like I didn't do it justice, feel free to find me after the talk. I'm happy to talk about it more. So the satellite that we used is the hyperspectral precursor applications mission, also called PRISMA. This is an Italian satellite launched in 2019. And it looks at the ground and captures pixels that represent a quarter acre, 30 by 30 meters, in 240 different colors, from visible light, from blue light to the shortwave infrared, and revisits the same location every 30 days, roughly. So the different locations that we collected photos of, images of, were the Jones Center at Itchaway, the Red Hills region, including Tall Timbers, Ordway Swisher Biological Station near Gainesville, and then down near Orlando, the Nature Conservancy's Disney Wilderness Preserve. And the benefit of using these locations is because Tall Timbers has been a long-term established research station. We have a lot of data about what plant communities exist here. And the other three are NEON sites, which are the Network of Ecological Observation Network. I might have butchered that one, but National Ecological Observation Network. And they also have very well documented plant communities located on them. So this is just sort of an example of how we collected that data. There are points for where we know different plant communities to be. And what we do is we extract that, the spectral curve underlying those points within that image. And we were able to gather roughly 2,000 different locations to train a machine learning model that takes those patterns and predicts, finds that pattern elsewhere and predicts it to be that land cover type. So what you have when you extract that spectral signature from a pixel is something that looks like this, where this represents 3 different plant community types. And you can see that it is, it's pretty difficult to separate them. You can't just pick one out easily. And this is because the overall curve drowns out any peaks that you might see. And our transformation process aimed to combat this. And so what you end up actually getting after our transformation process is something like on the right, where now you could easily separate them. And this emphasizes the peaks that may be related to the underlying chemistry or structure that is ecologically important in these communities. So a little bit more about how we were able to get this transformation. First, you have to look at what makes up a pixel. Because they are quarter-acre areas, they do have multiple components within them. This example, you can see there's a bit of water, there's some vegetation, and then there's mostly soil. Scientists, after doing a lot of research, have realized that on Earth, 95% of pixels contain some combination of water or shadow, which appear similar, green vegetation, and soil. And because of this, mathematically, if we know what the signature of a pixel is, and we know what the signature of those unique components that are found everywhere are, you can calculate how much of each of those components there is. And when you remove it, you're left with the unknown component or the unique characteristic that then shines through. And that's how we get our transformation. So it removes the broader pattern of these dominant land cover types, and this leaves behind, the unique signature that could be representative of plant waxiness, different plant pigments, or even soil moisture. And that's how you get to this, where you can see the distinctions. And this is what we used to create those land use land cover maps. We compared making maps with the left data and making maps with the right data. The way that we created these maps with the modeling is using a machine learning algorithm that aggregates hundreds of flowcharts or decision trees to then make predictions. These decision trees are essentially yes or no flowcharts that are given a random subset of the data and have to figure out how to best split that data. And so because it is a model that is made up of a bunch of decision trees, it is called a random forest model, or as I like to think of it, hundreds of flowcharts in a trench coat. And so moving on now to our accuracy assessment of these models, you can see that we predicted with roughly a 70% accuracy. This is without using the transformation. And if you're to visualize this, it's possible to imagine looking at 20 pixels, 6 of them would be inaccurate. So using the transformation, we get roughly 75% accuracy. This varies from 75 to 87%, and this results in a 4 to 5.2% increase. And that would, out of 20 pixels, you can imagine that that gives us 1 additional pixel that is accurately predicted. And that doesn't sound like much, but when you imagine that this pixel represents a 1/4 acre of land, if you expand this to the whole southeast, that's covering a large chunk of area that we now have a better estimate of what is happening on the ground. And so just to emphasize, we're comparing the untransformed to the transformed here. And so now looking at those, we're going to look at a subset, a subset of plant communities out of the 21, just these 5 that I sort of went into detail earlier about. And you can see without the transformation, we do get pretty good accuracy. We get 84% accuracy predicting flatwoods pine savanna, 86% predicting sandhill pine savanna, 60% predicting upland pine savanna, and then 32% predicting that old field pine savanna, and 80% for pine plantations. And the reason why we're not getting very good accuracy for the upland pine savannas and those old field savannas is because old field savannas are in the process of becoming restored to upland pine savannas. And so there is a gradient of species overlap between those two that the satellite imagery in our models just wasn't able to really parse out like we had hoped. But looking at mapping the same thing with the transformation, we now get 96% for flatwoods, 92% for sandhill, 71% for upland pine savannas, and 34% for old fields, as well as 84% for pine plantations. And so all of these did improve. It wasn't a miracle for the upland versus old field pine savanna problem that we were having, but it does seem to make things more accurate. So what you get is, starting with a hyperspectral image, which looks something like this. This is for the Red Hills region. You can then apply the predictive map and get something like this. I might try to, so you can see the orange here is Lake Imonia, and it is covered in lily pads and duckweed, and so it is predicting it as a forb marsh. And you can see even the distinction between that and the water, where the boats have carved out a path. Moving from there a little bit north, you can see row crop agriculture. And then across 319, you can see the swamp marsh of Fauchelli. And so we know that this map is not 100% accurate, because by testing it, we know it is only 75% accurate. But Tall Timbers is located here, and this is Oldfield, because for decades it was under agricultural practices. And when you do explore further east and north, you do have properties like Pebble Hill or Arcadia that do still have that intact ground cover component. And so, while it might not be perfect, Kevin Robertson and I did attempt to go out and look at some of these areas where it had predicted native ground cover, where we previously assumed there was none, and we were able to add several acres of this native ground cover area to our internal database. So it did prove useful in that case. And so just some findings from the paper itself. Hyperspectral imagery paired with this mixture residual transformation significantly improves mapping of closely related plant communities. It improves the separation of different pine savannas, such as the flatwoods pine savanna, sandhills, upland pine, and pine plantations. And while there's still a lot more work to do for old fields, the mixture residual transformation did even improve those. Since the paper publication, we actually did acquire more funding from the Natural Resource Conservation Service to map these same ecosystems across longleaf's range, so from Louisiana up to North Carolina. And we accomplished this by also taking advantage of FNA, Florida Natural Areas Inventory's internal database of longleaf ecosystem occurrences to train a more robust model that was better representative of this large region. And we have had a field technician go and explore these different areas and note whether or not there is longleaf in the overstory, or if there is still that native grassy ground cover component. And we still haven't analyzed that data, but that'll be exciting to sift through. And future directions, I do hope to eventually test the same sort of model on newer satellites. There's one from the European Space Agency, the EnMAP satellite launched in 2022. And eventually, so all of this project was funded by NASA because they are hoping to launch their own hyperspectral satellite called the Surface Biology Geology Mission, and that should be launching in 2028, and I do look forward to also seeing how well that maps different plant communities. And so my final thoughts are that satellites possess powerful technology. Hyperspectral satellites gather even more data, and there are ways to make the most of this data. And then, knowing where sensitive ecosystems are can help us proactively conserve them. And this helps with either conservation land purchasing or incentives-based programs for land managers and approaching those land managers or landowners about those opportunities. So ultimately, this offers us a tool to estimate conservation value without ever actually stepping foot onto a property. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Thanks so much.